Now, I normally start my review standing in front of a car, but I don't want to get in between you and this incredibly svelte, beautiful thing. This is the multi-award-winning Hyundai Ioniq 6, the electrified Streamliner, or so they claim. In this all-wheel drive, guys, it is stunning. But this beauty does come at a price that rivals a BMW 3 Series, a price that is well over what you'd pay for a Tesla Model 3. Is it worth it though? My name is Ayman I. Abdullah, this is Blazing Motoring, this is our review of the Hyundai Ioniq 6. Now this is perhaps the Ioniq 6's worst angle, and even that is relative. And I say that because the front end of this car is relatively unremarkable. The headlights, for example, which incorporate the parametric pixel LEDs and actually come with an adaptive high beam function, are very smart, but they look quite plain. And down below you have air breathers, there's lots of very smart aerodynamics, including a couple of moving vents to adjust cooling based on whether or not this car needs it. All of that is again very smart, but it looks quite plain. In fact, the only thing in front that I find remarkable is the sheer size of the Hyundai logo and the fact that it sits flush against the bodywork. In fact, this car's strive for maximum aerodynamic efficiency extends to some truly nerdy points. For starters, that logo is flush. All the seals and all of the trim here all have a little bit of rubber grouting in order to minimize the amount of drag as the air makes its way over the bodywork, all in order to contribute to that 0.21 coefficient of drag figure, which makes this one of the most aerodynamic cars in the world. And this is where I think the Ioniq 6 starts to look a lot better. So for starters, you have this almost coupe-like roofline that descends ever so gently to this very tapered rear. You have a double spoiler back here, again to help reduce drag and of course make the car look fantastic. And of course, this particular model, being the Max all-wheel drive, comes with 20-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Pirelli P0 tires. These are high-performance rubbers for a high-performance car because this car is blisteringly fast, but we'll get onto that a little bit later. In terms of design flourishes, again, I think the wheels of this car look fabulous. But on top of that, you still have some of those parametric pixels here in the door mirrors, and you have those flush door handles, again, to reduce drag and also look fantastic. Now, this particular car is a very, very dark blue. And as a result, it means that the wheels and all of the various contrasting trim pieces on this car are done up in silver. If you were to get this car in black, which I initially thought it was because it was given to me in a basement car park, all the trim pieces are done up in bronze. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this car would have looked better with bronze accents, but the silver does look pretty good as well. One thing of note about this car, however, is the fact that unfortunately, despite this very nice coupe-like roofline, it doesn't have frameless windows. Now, I know it's a really specific niggle, but the BMW i4 has them, and I think they look great, and on this, it would have just tied it all in a little better, you know? But this is where I think the Ioniq 6 looks its best. One, because most people will be looking at it from back here anyway, what with this kind of performance, but more importantly, because it reminds me of a turbocharged air-cooled Porsche, if you remember those, water-cooled Porsche. And it just looks fabulous. I love this double spoiler. And the fact that up here is your third brake light, but from the top, this entire area lights up in red to make it just look a little bit more special. Then you have more of these parametric pixels that stretch all the way from one end to the other, which create a light bar at night and have the indicators, and everything is built into that except for the rear fogs and rear reverse lights, because those are down there. And before you go into the comments, I know you can't have reverse lights in the front of the car because that wouldn't be in reverse, would it? See, I can preempt your comments. Now, the funny thing about the Ioniq 6 is that, clearly displayed once again on the action, it is not actually a hatchback. Despite what this sloping tailgate might suggest, it is actually a saloon. And so the tailgate opens to reveal a boot, which is enormous. In fact, this car over the weekend had balloons inflated for a party and a wheelchair and bags for a weekend, and it all fit very nicely in here, enough to fit 5 people inside as well. This car is, again, really practical, and on top of that, underneath the boot floor there is still enough space for you to hide all your charging cables, which means they never had to take up space in the boot. That is a practical solution that even Volvo couldn't figure out, because with the S90 or the S60 you just get a little bag for your charger, which is slightly inelegant. And as far as I'm concerned, this size makes up for a lot of things, because the load lip is quite high, and of course in the boot itself there is a little bit of a lip as well. But making up for that are the fact that the seats do fold 60-40 and they fold completely flat, which means you can actually put in very long items into this car. And I say very long because inside it is absolutely cavernous. And honestly, if you were to pass something from the rear all the way here, you could get quite a bit of 2x4 in here. Anyway, this interior, however, aside from carrying stuff, is pretty good. I'll start with the basics. Firstly, you have these 2 very large digital screens in front of you. This obviously does the instrumentation and this side does the infotainment. And Hyundai, Kia infotainment systems are, while not the flashiest things in the world, they work very well. And they tend to respond very quickly. The graphics are quite easy to understand and they're quite pleasing and everything responds quickly. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a pretty good infotainment system. I wish there was some sort of toggle to control it, because this is a little bit further away than I'd like, but we can't have it all, right? I can live with this. More importantly, this screen up ahead of me is fantastic because yes, the graphics are a little bit much. There's a lot of exuberance being displayed here, but all the information that you need is displayed to you in a manner that's very easy and quick to understand, and that I appreciate a lot. I also appreciate the fact that I get always my instant fuel economy, or in this car, energy efficiency, so I always know just how much power I'm using at any given time and what my average is, so that if, for example, I'm trying to drive long distance, I can understand, okay, there are maybe a few things I need to do, or maybe I need to slow down in order to get the economy that I need in order to reach the next charger, which I like. I also appreciate the fact that this car comes with a full color heads-up display displayed onto the windscreen, not a little visor thing that came up like the Kona Electric. And again, all the information that you need is displayed there, including things like your blind spot information system as well as your ADAS system. So it's all there in your line of sight, so you never have to take your eyes off the road. Aiding that further is this steering wheel, because unlike every other manufacturer out there, these are all still real buttons which you can feel with your fingers and operate without having to look once you are familiar with the controls themselves. Why can't more car makers do this? Why do they all have to go down the same route as Volkswagen and Mercedes-Benz, where they've made these steering wheels so infernally difficult to use that it makes the act of driving complicated? Rant aside, what I do appreciate is, again, everything in here is a button, including the climate controls. Although some of them are touch-based, at least they don't go anywhere. So they are exactly where you left them, so operating them can be quite easy, and you have more buttons on this side to control other things. But the weird thing is that the door lock, unlock, auto hold window switches are all here. In an attempt to minimize the amount of impact of the doors into the cabin space, they've moved everything into the center console, which on one hand leaves this enormous speaker grille for the Bose audio system, which I like. I also appreciate the translucent door bin, as well as the ambient lighting strips that they put above and below the driver's armrest in order to make this appear like it floats, especially at night. But again, when I arrive at a toll plaza and stuff like that, I tend to look for my switches here, not here. The last time I had to look for switches here was when I had a Jeep Wrangler company car, and before that, a Satria Neo. Anyway, among other things I do like. Firstly, these seats are leather upholstery. They are fully electric with memory for the driver. They are also heated and ventilated. The steering wheel is heated. And in the center of the steering wheel boss, you get these 4 colored LEDs. Now, if you were to change the drive modes from here, these LEDs change colors. So when you go to normal, they're kind of like an indigo. Then when you go into sport, they go red. And then when you go into eco, they flash green. And then they go back to being white to show you what your current charge state is, which I appreciate very much. I also appreciate the fact that the center console houses an enormous bin down here where you can put absolutely anything you need. There are USB ports, a 12-volt socket. There's another USB-A port up here, which is great for your wired Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. You also have a center tunnel, which is big enough for, in this case, some sweets. There are also a couple of USB-C ports and a nice little pocket here which is big enough to fit a smart tag. This, I think, is very smart because in most countries we usually have some sort of toll reader, and so being able to put all your cards and your machinery in a nice place is very appreciated. What I would have appreciated as well, however, is the glove box drawer, which is available in the Ioniq 5 but is somehow not available in the Ioniq 6. And the weird thing is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be a drawer, and it was a drawer in other markets. Back here though, the space is insane. So the seat in front of me is set up for my driving position. I'm about 170-ish centimeters, I think. And as you can see, I have S-class levels of space back here. My knees are in a different postcode from the back of the front seats. And even though it's got a sloping roofline, I do still have a pretty decent amount of headroom. And of course, if I wanted to, I could just slouch. Now, when you're not sat like this, which is, I suspect, a chiropractor's dream, you will be able to enjoy the amount of space back here because, again, knee room is great. You can't quite tuck your feet in underneath the seat in front of you, but there's no real need because, again, the seat is in a different state. You do still have the same sort of door issue here where you have, you know, stuff going on here, but at least the controls are where they're supposed to be. There's a pocket here in front of the speaker where you can put a phone. There are very large door bins. There's another pocket here, and overall it does look pretty good. Quality back here is quite good as well. These seats are nice and comfy. You do have a couple of ISOFIX mounts. There is an armrest here with a couple of cup holders. You have a couple of USB-C ports and a couple of aircon vents or crotch coolers in the center. All of this, again, looks pretty good. If I had to nitpick, firstly, I do not appreciate the fact that the pockets on the back of the seats of this car are done up in the net. They look fine now, but in about 5 to 8 years' time, they're going to start sagging and they're going to look like crap. And then the other thing that I don't appreciate is the fact that actually the quality is not that great, because back here, this is all plastic. It's not the worst plastic in the world, but it's still plastic nonetheless. And for something in this particular region, it's pushing about 300,000+ ringgit, I would have appreciated some sort of soft touch material here. The other thing is that the glass roof is only over the front seat. It doesn't extend all the way to the rear, which is a little bit annoying. And although I would have moaned about there not being sort of rear sun blinds in order to keep the little kitty winkies away from UV light, these are tinted as standard. And I say that because it's very dark, and as far as I can tell, there isn't a film on it, which means all Ioniq 6s are going to look like this, which is great because from the outside they look fabulous. From the inside, it's nice and cool. Absolutely no heat ingress. Now, enough about this car when it's stationary. Oh yeah, one more thing. That front seat, only that front seat, or possibly the driver's seat, goes into a premium relaxion mode, which seems to take away the weight from certain pressure points, and it arranges it in such a way that it's evenly distributed across your body, which means that when you are charging the car, which doesn't take very long, you can have a very, very, very comfortable nap. Now, again, enough about the stuff of this car when it's stationary, because the Ioniq 6 has a little trick up its sleeve, and that is revealed on the open road. Now, driving the Ioniq 6 is pretty interesting. Now, firstly, as I mentioned earlier, this is the max all-wheel drive, which means we have 2 electric motors powering both axles, producing an insane amount of power and torque, which means that 0 to 60 is completed in a pretty unreasonable amount of time. Unreasonably fast, that is. Of course, if you were to get the max rear-wheel drive, that does increase the 0 to 100 time just a little bit, but honestly, it's really not that big of a deal. It doesn't make the car undrivably slow. Far from it, in fact. Perfectly good in town. But for this particular car, this is perhaps the best way to exemplify what I mean about the Ioniq 6. So, as some of you may be aware, the head of R&D for drive dynamics and stuff like that at Hyundai is a chap called Albert Biermann. Now, he was formerly of BMW, and as a result, it means that these cars come as standard with a little bit better and a little bit more attention to detail when it comes to driving dynamics, and that is what sets both Hyundai and Kia apart. Now, although this is not an N model, that's for sure, it is still pretty good to drive. For starters, the steering wheel, while quite numb in with very little communication, is still very accurate and very direct. And sat here, it's very easy to place the car on the road as a result of this pretty communicative steering wheel. On top of that, because of this car's very, very low center of gravity and enormous 20-inch alloy wheels, it means that this car does have pretty good mechanical grip as well. It stays planted on the road, it's very confidence-inspiring, and it does feel like a properly good car to drive. There is some degree of compromise though. The ride is not nearly as floaty and as soft as what we saw from the Ioniq 5. Which is to be expected. This is a sports sedan after all, hardly a big lumbering crossover like the Ioniq 5, which to be fair wasn't actually that bad to drive either. But this clearly has a more driver-focused edge to it, and that is obvious from within the first 200 meters of driving this car. It's never uncomfortable, very, very far from uncomfortable in fact. Rather, it is just the right amount of communication to understand what the car is doing at any given time. Like I said, it inspires confidence. And that is certainly something that we would want from something that is pushing out this kind of performance. Now, the other thing that the Ioniq 6 does particularly well is in terms of NVH, or noise, vibration, and harshness. So naturally, most EVs are quiet. That's to be expected. And the Ioniq 6 does go some way in that regard. These tires, for example, are developed in such a way that they reduce rolling resistance as well as overall noise in operation, and the windows all the way around are made of acoustic glass, which means they let less noise in, and they really do make a difference. But the bigger factor here is actually in terms of the rim and tire combination. So because these are huge tires and also with huge wheels, it also means that there is some degree of noise that gets into the cabin, even though noise is really well suppressed. But when you're driving at particularly higher speeds, there is a little bit of tire roar that sort of makes its way into the cabin, and when you're doing about 3 or 4 hours in a journey, this might get a little bit tiring. But aside from that, everything in here is fantastic because everything is built really well. There are no creaks, there are no rattles, nothing in here squeaks, there is nothing to irritate you over a long motorway journey. And I feel that that is where the Ioniq 6 really shines. Although EVs are generally happiest in town doing relatively slow speeds and stuff like that, because of the very low drag coefficient of this car, it does mean the Ioniq 6 is very capable of doing long distance drives in a relatively efficient manner. In fact, if you were to keep your pedal at about 110 to 120 kilometers an hour, you can quite easily realize this car's maximum range of 500-ish kilometers. Or if you're driving in town, more spiritedly, you're more likely to get about 450. And as a result, going back to what I've said before about Korean EVs, this is a vehicle that you can trust, and the distance to empty, for example, that it gives you, the range estimate, is also a number that you can trust. There is clearly a lot of engineering that's gone into this in order to make it into a package that, again, you can trust. And I would trust the Ioniq 6. I trust this car for various reasons. Firstly, because Hyundai has been making cars for a very long time, which means they know how to make a motor car. And on top of that, all the safety systems in here are made and engineered by people who actually know what safety systems are about. So for starters, the ADAS system, the lane keep, lane avoidance, blind spot monitoring, rear collision, all of that nonsense, is engineered in such a way that it's very easy and intuitive to use. It is not overly intrusive, it does exactly what you expect it to do and then no more. And they also add little goodies that once you get used to them become very difficult to live without. For example, the lane watch system. I don't remember what Hyundai calls it, that's what Honda calls it. But whenever you indicate, it shows you a little feed in your instrument cluster about what's going on in your blind spot. And that does mean that when you indicate in order to change lanes and so on, you just have a little bit more sense of security when you're making those maneuvers because your car knows what's going on and it's showing you what's going on as well. And that, to me, makes all the difference because it means that every time I get into this car, whatever it is that it's telling me, I can trust. It's bankable in that regard. The other thing that I can trust about this car is the fact that it charges at rapid speeds. So because it's an 800 volt architecture, AC charging is done up to 11 kilowatts, which means this car can go from dead to full in about 8 hours thereabouts. Whereas it also accepts 300 or up to 350 kilowatts DC, which means this car can go from 10 to 80% in 14 minutes. Again, that means that on a long motorway journey, finding the right charger will mean that you can halve your charge stops. And if you can't find a 350 kilowatt charger, that's no big deal, because even at 180 kilowatts, this car will go from 30 to 80% in just 18 minutes. That is a game changer for EVs. And it does mean that, again, you can trust a car like this to do distances should you want to use this as a motorway cruiser, because frankly, this is a great place to be. These seats are comfortable, there's ventilation, there's lumbar support. I mean, what more do you want? But then it goes back to price. So the bugbear with this particular car is that the prices for the Ioniq 6 start at a relatively high price, especially when compared to the all-conquering Tesla Model 3. But when you consider that this is a car that is, in terms of quality, engineering, and execution, on par with what you'd get from, say, BMW or Mercedes-Benz, then suddenly the prices don't seem so bad. Given the fact that this all-wheel drive model is significantly, or rather about the same price, as the base model BMW i4 35 e-drive, or whatever the hell it's called, which does not have nearly as much range, means that this is a viable alternative. The same could be said of other vehicles within this segment. Like the C300, for example, that car does, 500 kilometers on a tank, which means it's very similar to this. And if you're driving predominantly in town through traffic and so on, this car is plenty good enough. In fact, I might take one of these on a little trip that I've been planning. And if you'd like to know exactly what I have in mind, be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell to notify every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, where you'll find those updates. And that is where I will conclude the review of the 2023 Hyundai Ioniq 6, because honestly, this is a fantastic vehicle. It is a great package. It looks great. It drives great. It's a little bit expensive, but sure, nothing good in life is ever cheap. And if it is cheap, it very rarely is ever good. And that, to me, is a sticking point with this car. If you're willing to enjoy a great experience owning and driving a motor car, then the Ioniq 6 is something that you'll appreciate. But if you're the kind of person that looks down to the dollars and cents, you may be better served by a Tesla Model 3 or something along those lines. But this is still a pretty good car. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.